These scary, unsolved mysteries have baffled experts for years. Some may never be solved, but there's a hope that future evidence might lead to the answers to some of these strange mysteries. Number 5. The Headless Horseman folktale goes back centuries and has its origins in many European countries, one of those being Germany. But a headless horse is a less common story. So when archaeologists uncovered just that in medieval cemetery, the cause for this strange practice was a mystery. The cemetery was discovered in 1920 in the town of Nittlingen, near Stuttgart. At the time, the plans were to build a railway line through the area, though that was later abandoned. When it was originally discovered, there wasn't much investigation into the site, but plans for a new housing development led to more excavations recently. Archaeologists have dated the site back to the 600s, a time when the Merovingian dynasty was in power. The Merovingians reigned from 450 to 751 and ruled over most of France and Central Europe. It was not necessarily a stable time though, with brothers and cousins fighting against one another. By the 600s, mayors had more power than the kings. The cemetery was discovered to hold 110 burials. Most were buried in simple rows, but a special circular pit was reserved for the wealthy and elite. Many of the burials had grave goods, including weapons, jewelry, and fine clothes. But one stood out to archaeologists. Buried near one man was the body of a horse. Researchers believe the man it was buried near would have been the horse's rider in life, and the horse had been buried as a grave good rather than a sacrifice. But missing from the grave was the horse's head. So far, researchers have been unable to identify the man. He was very likely wealthy in life. He may have been a member of the local elite and the head of a farming household. It's not believed that he was a particularly high-ranking noble, and it's possible the mystery of who this man was will never be resolved. It's believed that the horse was buried with its master as a sign of his wealth and the wealth of his family. But that hasn't explained why the horse was buried without its head. The closest that experts have come to explaining this strange mystery is that it was likely part of a burial ceremony. The horse's head will never be found. Stranger still, this isn't the first of its kind to be discovered. While the Nittlingen site only had one headless horse, a medieval burial site in Saarland contained 4 headless horses, as well as hunting dogs and other grave goods. In this case, researchers believe that the person buried there was a prince, and the burial was a combination of a pagan and Christian burial. Still, the reason behind the strange practice remains unknown. Number 4. The strange passing of Christopher Case is one of the scariest unsolved mysteries. Even those who aren't believers in the paranormal would find the final week of Christopher's life a terrifying experience. Christopher was an ordinary 35-year-old man living in Seattle in 1991. He was an executive at a company that produced elevator music. Christopher was a great lover of music and had previously worked as a radio DJ. In particular, he was fascinated by ancient music. In April of 1991, his work took him to San Francisco for a conference. While there, he met a woman described as being more than 20 years his senior. She also had an interest in ancient music, particularly from ancient Egypt and ancient Mediterranean civilizations. She also had an interest in a romantic relationship with Christopher. Christopher turned her down politely, but this apparently enraged the older woman. She told Christopher that she was a witch and cursed him. She said he wouldn't live longer than a week. Before this point, Christopher was a rational young man with no belief in witchcraft. After returning home, he told a friend about the strange encounter, but they both brushed it off as a weird woman. This didn't last long. Over the next few days, Christopher called his friends multiple times, saying there was something strange going on in his apartment. He described whispers coming from nowhere and shadowy figures moving across his apartment. On one occasion, he woke up paralyzed with some unseen being on top of him. The next morning, he found tiny cuts on the ends of his fingers. Christopher went to a religious bookstore and bought crucifixes and books about combating witchcraft. He truly believed his life was in danger. On the night of April 16th, the activity in his apartment was so strong that he spent the night at a hotel. His friend tried to call him while he was away. When she couldn't get through, she asked the police to perform a welfare check. The house was found locked up with no signs of anything strange going on. When Christopher returned home, he called his friend and left a message on her answering machine. He sounded calm and resigned to his fate. He said they had almost gotten him the night before, though he never expanded on what had actually happened. He didn't believe he would live much longer, though. The next day, April 18th, Christopher's body was found in his home. He was fully clothed in the bathtub with his head leaning against the wall. Police found salt lining the walls of his apartment, countless crucifixes and burnt candles. There was also religious music playing quietly in many rooms. Christopher had passed away from a disease that causes heart failure. It's a disease that often hits otherwise healthy individuals between the ages of 20 and 40. But this isn't a disease that's normally brought on by stress. Christopher hadn't simply scared himself into having heart failure. Normally, the disease has a number of other symptoms, such as flu symptoms, chest pain, general fatigue, none of which Christopher felt. It seems unlikely that someone had actually placed a curse on Christopher, but this previously rational man had been completely terrified by something in the week leading up to his passing. What exactly that was, suppose remains a terrifying mystery. Number 3. There's always something a little creepy about missing ships, and the Marlborough has attracted more than its fair share of scary ghost stories. But the truth about this ship has never been uncovered. The Marlborough was a merchant sailing ship launched in 1876. For the next 14 years, it sailed from the United Kingdom to New Zealand and was one of the fastest ships on the sea. It once made the journey from Littleton, New Zealand to Cornwall in just 71 days. The ship carried passengers who would be making new lives for themselves in New Zealand. For the return journey, it carried cargo which usually consisted of wool and frozen meat. It made 14 successful journeys until January of 1890, when it disappeared without a trace. The Marlborough left Littleton on January 11, 1890, with a crew of 29 men and some passengers. The first 2 days of the journey went without issue, and on January 13th, another ship communicated with the Marlborough. It was the last time anybody heard from it. When months went by without any word from the ship, it was listed as missing. A search took place, but there was still no sign of the ship or her crew. That supposedly changed in 1891, when rumors began to spread that the ship had wrecked near Good Success Bay in Tierra del Fuego, located in Argentina. According to the rumor, the crew had been forced to work for the government there at the life-saving station at Good Success Bay. Ships were sent to investigate the claims, but there was no evidence of anybody from the Marlborough having been at the station. By 1913, the Marlborough had joined the list of many ships lost at sea that were never expected to be found. But in October of that year, a Singapore newspaper reported that the vessel had been spotted, sailing near Chile in August. A ship named the Johnson had gotten close enough to launch a boarding party. They found the bodies of the crew scattered around the ship. One person lay under the steering wheel with his weapon still at his side. There was no sign of foul play and no explanation for what had caused this terrifying event. The Johnson fled the scene, the sailors terrified by the sight. The story was likely just a story. The area where the Marlborough had allegedly been seen is known for its frequent and heavy storms. It's almost impossible that the ship had survived 23 years sailing in that location without a living crew. That hasn't stopped others from coming forward with similar stories of the long-lost ship being spotted. With all hands still on deck, its true fate is forever a mystery. Number 2. The SL1 disaster is the only nuclear incident in the United States to have had fatal consequences. But the real cause of the disaster remains a mystery to this day. It was the first day of work after the new year in 1961. 3 men arrived at SL1, an experimental nuclear reactor located 40 miles west of Idaho Falls. At the time, the Army was looking to create a portal nuclear reactor that could be used in remote bases like those in the Arctic Circle. The reactor only had 3 operators and was considered to be safe so long as the protocols were followed. The 3 men were John Burns, Richard Legg, and Richard McKinley. All had been working at SL1 for a while and were known to enjoy the bars in Idaho Falls during their time off. Things weren't always great between the three men, who worked in a relatively isolated area. In particular, Burns and Legg were known to have gotten into at least one fight the previous year. January 3rd was the first day after an 11-day shutdown over the holidays. It was also Legg's first day as a supervisor to his coworkers. This was despite the fact that Legg and Burns had started working at the reactor at the same time. Restarting the reactor required Rod 9 to be pulled 4 inches from its resting place to be connected to an automatic drive mechanism. This had to be done manually by someone standing on top of the reactor. Just after 9 p.m., Burns pulled the rod up 20 inches. This almost instantly caused a reaction. A pressure wave was caused and extremely hot water erupted upwards. Legg and Burns passed away immediately while McKinley was wounded. An automatic alarm was sounded. The responding team at first thought nothing was wrong. From the outside of the building, it looked as if nothing had happened. Once they got inside, their equipment indicated there were high levels of radiation in the area, and the reactor itself had been destroyed. McKinley was found in the rubble but couldn't explain what had happened. He passed away before a doctor arrived. The building itself contained most of the fallout, so an environmental disaster didn't follow. The only victims in this tragedy were the 3 operators. The cause of the incident was clear, but why Burns had pulled the rod so far remained a mystery. There were rumors that Burns and Legg were in a love triangle. It was true that Burns' wife had asked him for a divorce shortly before the accident. The rumor claimed that Legg had been sleeping with Burns' wife, and this was Burns' way of getting revenge. Another possibility is that Burns' mental state had nothing to do with Legg. Some believe this rumor was simply a cover-up. There had been reports of the rod sticking, and that it had happened once again. Even though all 3 men knew how careful they needed to be when removing the rod, Burns had been forced to pull harder than normal to get it unstuck, and when he did, it was pulled higher, causing the disaster. The truth behind this strange mystery will likely never be found. The SL1 was decommissioned and dismantled, and changes to future designs meant that the removal of one rod would never cause this kind of accident again. Number 1. On July 2nd, 2005, a couple walking near Ovid Hall Lake in Michigan encountered a strange sight. The body of a man was standing upright in the middle of the lake. The man was identified as Todd Geeb, and this discovery did not solve the strange mystery of what happened to him 3 weeks earlier. It was in the early hours of June 12th that Todd was last seen alive. The night before, he and a group of friends had gone to an all-night keg party at an apple orchard about 2 miles north of White Road in Casanova. The friends stayed for a few hours before a fight broke out between the partygoers. At 12:45 a.m., Todd decided to leave and walk back to the house he shared with his cousin. The house was only 1.5 miles away from the party, so that wasn't too strange. 2 minutes after he left, the friend that had driven Todd to the bar where he met his friends received a call. Todd just said that he had had enough and hung up. 3 minutes later, another friend received a call saying he was in a field. Again, the call was cut off. That friend called Todd back, but all they could hear was the sound of breathing or wind before the line went dead. Todd, or whoever had his phone, tried to call the friend back. The final attempt was at 12:57 a.m. It was the last activity on Todd's phone and the last thing he did before he mysteriously vanished. Numerous searches took place over the next 3 weeks, including in the field surrounding Ovid Hall Lake. No trace of him was found until July 2nd, when his body was discovered. The witnesses reported that the man's head and shoulders were visible above the water. It would have been impossible for the search party to have not seen him. He was fully clothed, with his wallet still in his pocket. Despite the strange circumstances surrounding his discovery, the police claimed that Todd had decided to go for a swim while very drunk and lost his life. There was a high amount of alcohol in his system, but there wasn't water in his lungs. Experts also determined that it was unlikely he'd been in the water the entire time that he had been missing. Even if searchers had missed him, water insects wouldn't have, but there was no sign of any bugs in Todd's hair or clothes when he was found. The case was officially closed, but Todd's loved ones have continued to campaign for answers in this strange unsolved mystery. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.